Hi, I'm Emma Donoghue. I'm the writer.
Jacob, do you want to say your name?
Hi, I'm Jacob and I play Jack.
Hi, I'm Brie Larson and I play Mom.
Hi, I'm Joan Allen and I play Grandma.
Yes, that's the best one.
Hi, I'm Lenny Abrahamson. I'm the director.
Great.
It was actually not that hard because it was mostly a playing movie where I played a lot. Because it's kind of like a movie where I'm playing a little kid that kind of is like, whatever.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, so
What was the toughest part for you?
wearing an itchy wig.
I'm sorry about the wig. That one's on me. I relish the opportunity because cinema has different techniques and it offers different pleasures, frankly. And one thing I love is the ways in which the film is different from the book. There are so many moments when you're looking at Jake's face huge on screen and you don't quite know what's going through his mind, and I love the unspelled out nature of that, because in a book you know exactly what they're thinking. I love the way the characters have physical life, and I love that Ma and Jack, it's a real two-hander in the film. You get sort of equal access to both of them, and I think that's in many ways a huge improvement on the book. So I relish the task. And there were many moments where I would change things in the script and Lenny would say, actually, let's get back to the book. So it didn't feel oppositional. It felt as if he and I were both trying to kind of translate the magic.
That was probably both the most challenging and the most exhilarating part of making this film, was to hold on to the capacity to operate inside Jack's childhood magical sense of this space as a whole world, as a place that was, as he says at one point in the film, went all the way to the end, never stopped. And on the other hand, you are looking, because cameras show you what they show you. You are looking at this grimy single room location. I think what we did was we found ways, myself and Danny, to move in and out of Jack's point of view. We wanted to do it subtly. We didn't want any big stylistic markers that would say, okay, now we're entering into the magical world, because I think that would undermine the believability, the intimacy of the encounter with the characters. But what we did tend to do was to say, okay, if we shoot on slightly longer lenses and we concentrate on faces, the walls of the room can actually disappear. Even in a 10 by 10 room, it's remarkable that you can actually forget for chunks of time in there that it's constrained. And then if you cut back to a wide shot where you see more than one corner, and you go, my God, all this life that I've been experiencing for the last few minutes, that's taking place in this little tiny environment. So there was that, and then the other thing about us thinking our way as far as we could as two grizzly old men into the mind of a 5-year-old, it was to remember that scale is really elastic for a kid. So Jake's attention could be captured by some tiny corner of the room, or some texture on the table, or his thoughts could drift off into the abstract. And we were able to follow that, and for those periods of time we're with him. And then holding on Brie, you suddenly feel all of the things that she is protecting her boy from. You can see those on her face. So it's a combination of how you study the character, what scales you operate at, the kind of lenses you choose. It was a constant conversation with myself and Danny to move, as you say, between those two different worlds. Pose it. And luckily, it turns out that what Emma was working on and how she was working on the script was there was a huge kind of synergy in what we were thinking about. And it was at that point that I read the script, and at that point that we started to work together.
Joan, Brie, do you want to talk about your first reactions to the script?
Well, I had read the book maybe a year prior, and one of the mysteries of the book is Ma, because she is seen through Jack's eyes, and so she's a saint. She's so ethereal, and she's sort of faceless. She's like a faceless feminine essence that's in the story, and so I was very curious when I heard that it was being made into a movie as to who that face would be, and never pictured it would be my face. And so the thing that I was so drawn to by the book, and then by it was still captured in the screenplay, was the myth that was there. That this was not just a story about some sort of crime tale, that this was Plato's cave, that this was Rapunzel, that this was Julius, that this was Demeter and Persephone. It was all of these reference points that I loved so much that were sort of woven into the story in such an innocent and delicate way. But you know, sometimes you pick up on the myth and it's just an accident. I think it comes out naturally out of people, and some people are aware of it. And I was lucky that when I sat down to meet with Lenny, he understood it in the same way that I did, and was interested in exploring the same aspect of the story, taking something that was a story that we had seen in the news, but taking it and reminding us of our roots, of where we came from, and making this a real universal love story, and a universal story about growing up and the pains that go with it, and the way that the beauty of living in a small space as a child. But there are some aspects of it that are so beautiful, and it's so nice to not see the darkness, but then in other ways there's a whole range of experience that's being missed because of it. And so after we had our long discussion about mythology and shared pictures of our dogs and all of those great things that you do to start a good working relationship, we asked a small group of women to come in. And it's so interesting saying women. I used to always think girls, because I was a girl, but now I'm like, we're women now. Women that came in and read for Ma, and it was just such a lovely time for both of us to see if this was a proper working relationship, if we could really capture what Ma was, even though we were working with just an audition, which isn't quite as in-depth as when you're actually making the thing. And like, I don't know, a week later or something, I got the call that I got the job. Yeah. Okay, that's a story.
Thank God.
Well, it's a little bit of both. Because the experience of making a movie you start to see it everywhere. It's just this amazing mechanism that your brain does, because it just so badly wants to be helpful and keep all of the information that you need as accessible as possible. So over the course of the 7 months I spent prepping and filling my brain with everything that was her, I was really changing the neurological patterns of my brain so that all of this stuff was accessible to me. So by the time we hit set, and we're shooting, I don't have to think, oh, my wrist hurts, and oh, there's all this dark past that's happened to me, and oh, I've got lack of vitamin D, and I have to remember that someone's going to be at the door. It becomes so ingrained in you that you just know it, that your brain works as if you are functioning as this other person. And because of that, you have to be quite gentle with yourself and very understanding that you are just being a vessel for somebody. And so it's important to allow yourself to go down the road of being that vessel, but having a very clear understanding that it's not you and it's not your problems. It's like when you hang out with your friend who's going through a dark depression and you can leave the lunch going, oh, now I feel depressed. You have to find a way to shake it off. And so there were many things I did, like really being very open with my friends and family and making sure that they called me constantly and reminded me of what my name was and sent me care packages. And small things like I love Palo Santo. It's this type of wood that you can burn that smells so nice. And I burn it in my house all the time. I burn it in my apartment. So the second you come home, it's like, oh, there I am. I'm here. This is me. And I even would go so far as to take a piece of paper and draw a line down the center of it and write Brie and Ma at the top. And just list all the things that were me and all the things that were Ma. And then you can very clearly call back on it. So those moments when you're at lunch and you're like, oh, I feel like no one understands me, and you're like, that's Ma, that's not me. I know that because I know that these people understand me, and I have many, other memories in my life that I can go back to. So if you understand, I found that personally, learning more about the brain helped me a lot, because then it didn't seem like I was going down some dark path. It was just my brain trying to be really helpful, going, oh, you want to be able to access the pain of sexual abuse? Here, we'll put it right there in front. And then later to be like, okay, great, thank you. Let's move that somewhere else. Let's move that into another storage facility that I don't have the key to anymore. Thanks. Well, there's like a couple layers to her. So there's Ma, who's Joy, who's, from being born to 17, and Lenny and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out who she was, and I ended up writing 3 journals as her, one from when she was like 10, one when she was like 14, and another when she was like 16, 17, just to try and get back into that older mindset and to remember what her hopes and dreams and goals and fears were at that time. And then there's the 2 years of isolation before Jack comes along, and so I stayed at home for a month and just sat with myself and saw what would come up. I imagined that there was a lot of time for her to reflect and to magnify and to forgive and to create a fantasy as to what that past was, and to, in some ways, glorify some aspects of her life, and in other ways, feel remorseful and frustration as to not being able to go back to it. And then it talks about it in the book as well, that she hits this very depressing low point where she cries and cries until she couldn't stop, until she discovers that she's pregnant, and then there's this new thing to live for and fight for that's outside of herself. And I had some amazing conversations with my mom, and I'm of the age now where I have a lot of friends who are having children of their own and getting to speak with them about this turn that happens, where suddenly there's not time to wallow. There's just, your heart grows 3 sizes, and suddenly there's this thing that is a piece of you that's growing outside of you that you have to love and nurture and protect, and at the same time try and explain what the world is. And so because of that, I believe that she created this mythology for Jack, that there was nothing outside this room, not just for him, but for her, so that he could be the reimagining of this space, and she could go down that pathway and see the world with fresh eyes, or see room, in this case, room as their world with fresh eyes again. And then from there, it was just meeting Jacob and spending time with him and creating our own friendship and our own relationship, right? Anything else you want to add that you think added to our relationship in the movie as Mom and Jack?
Well, your word was a little bit too long to understand.
Oh, my word. Okay. You don't want to say anything? You don't have to. What was your process in us getting to know each other?
It was that I was shy first, but then I wasn't shy because my mom had this idea that we could go and she should come over and we could get to know each other a little bit more. So that happened. And I guess we became friends.
Pretty nice version of it.
Oh, it just reminded me to stay open and curious and shut my brain off and just do it. And I think working with Jake, really just acting is sort of like childlike in some ways. You're pretending, and sometimes you can have a tendency to overthink things, and then that doesn't look as natural and stilted. And I think it was very inspiring to work with Jake, who was very present in the moment, just doing exactly what was required at that time to a really beautiful, pitch perfect degree. And I just sort of would watch him and go, oh, let's just turn the brain off and let's just do it. It was very inspiring for me.
Yeah, it's just, you remember that there's this sense of play and this ease to all of it, and that although, yeah, we are telling a story that has some delicate and dark material, it's not one that we really need to dip that far into, because it's just not even a frequent, it's like, it just goes above, he doesn't pick up on it. So the same way that I think he brings this perspective of innocence and light to the movie is exactly what he brought on set, where it's just very easy to not get too dark and to not get too serious, because you've got him around that's constantly going to make jokes and make fun of the process in some ways. Like when we did our reunion scene, and I'm banging on this police door and I'm crying and I'm holding him, and we yell cut, and you remember him like pushing off and me going, I don't get it. You just saw me 10 minutes ago. I don't know why you're so upset. And then he couldn't understand why I was still catching my breath and was singing Mason Jackson 5. And that's, I think the perfect example of what it was like working with him.
Thank you so much. We've never got that question so far, I won't say.
That's a round of applause.
Yeah. Limited edition again. Yes, when I was writing the book, I kind of sweated over whether they should have TV or not, because I knew they wouldn't be fully connected. They obviously couldn't have the internet because it's participatory. But I thought if they didn't have TV, it's a bit like some of the 19th century life. And it's not that I wanted their world to be pre-modern, it's just I wanted it to be isolated. So I thought, okay, they'll have TV, but really limited, because I didn't want them to be watching TV all day. So I saw it as this, it's a potent thing to bring into the storyline, but you don't want it to take over. And I thought it would be wonderful to have TV, which has been, in a way, part of what's been lulling Jack all these years, you know, entertainment. But actually, once he starts asking those questions and once Ma starts giving some honest answers, the TV actually does become a way for him to figure out how Boone fits into the wider world. And I was particularly happy when we got a fan letter from the creator of Dora the Explorer, who was delighted that Jack never renounces Dora, that even in the second half, Jack is still loyal to Dora. So yeah, I think you're right that TV actually enables us to bring up all sorts of things, and I love that scene where Jack and Ma are watching TV and he's beginning to figure out the difference between the different layers of reality of the different shows. You know, he's particularly confused by that moment where people are doing period drama. He's like, yeah, they're real people, but they're pretending to be people from hundreds of years ago. So yeah, I think it's an enormously rich element. Yeah,
and it's also you know, it would have been, the transition from the inside to the outside would have been entirely different without the existence of TV. And I think in the way that all children, you know, whatever, all of the myths of childhood, whether it be Santa Claus or any number of things that we tell kids, there's a point at which they sort of know they're not true, but would prefer to not face that, and where it's like a collective decision in the family that you will continue this for a while because, you know, it's important. Now, in Room, I suppose, I think at a certain point, Jack is thinking, Ma even says it when she's unlined him, she says, come on, Jack, you're clever, I know you've been thinking about this, and he shakes his head, which is to say, I don't want to think about this. So when he finally gives himself permission to do it, then it's like he is piecing together a puzzle. The pieces have already been there, and he's just allowing himself to put it together. And that, I think, is something that you can shoot that, and you can shoot the transition from inside to outside in a way that would be far more catastrophic, I think, if he'd never experienced motor cars or airplanes or any of the things that he's seen on TV.
I really love the myth of my reclusive
She was out partying, she was at
No, I just love the words that have been used today. It was so interesting. I mean, really how it started was in trying to understand those 2 years of basic silence of being alone in this place. And I meditate, so I was a little familiar with trying to get to mental silence and how hard that is. And then I had some friends who had been on silent retreats, and I was fascinated by the reactions because some of them could go 10 days and they do it every year, and it's just this time that they absolutely love. And you're not allowed to speak, you're not allowed to look at anybody because that's also seen as a form of communication. There's no connection to the outside world. But I had other friends who couldn't last 24 hours, panicked and left. And so there was this sense of sitting with yourself and imagining Ma at 17, 18, 19 years old, sitting with herself in the way that most teenagers don't. That's a period of time where it's all fleeing. It's all just getting away from everything and wanting to move out and pushing away a parent. And this is, in some ways, I felt that period of time to be this bizarrely mature experience. It's set in a horrible setting, but a way that she has to come to terms with who she is now and this new individual that she's become that is completely separate from her friends, from her home, from her parents. And it's the time right before she has a child, which then becomes her next identity as being a mother. So for myself, it was just seeing what that mental chatter felt like, and if it was something to feel the painful moments of it, to feel the eureka moments. There were moments that I remembered of my childhood that I had forgotten that were so beautiful, and other moments that I completely had forgotten that were more painful. And so having that time to just very simply reflect, I felt like it became a huge part of getting to know her better. But it wasn't like painful. I'm a homebody, so I found it kind of fun, to be honest. I didn't mind it.
And I just did some reading about abductions and parents. You know, I looked up, in particular, Terry Probin, who was Jason Dugard's mother. I was hoping to speak with her. I wasn't able to make that happen. But she had some YouTube footage of what it was like to be reunified, and she said one thing that was very helpful to me about that she said it's a very difficult thing to reunify, and you need a lot of help in order to do it. And in fact, she and her daughter had created a foundation that helps people in this situation, helps families reunify not only from abduction cases, but veterans who had long periods away in a war zone where they've been traumatized, and it's very difficult for families to find a way when they've had such radically different experiences for extended periods of time and are sad and traumatized by them. So, I'm a mother of a 21-year-old and have been sufficiently scared enough by various choices she's made in her life to understand what that's like, to feel that scared, for your child, and how, it's a ripple effect that, it's certainly not an ouch contest. If it were, obviously Ma would have the biggest ouch, but it's not a contest, but everybody has a huge ouch. And that's just the way it is. And what I'm so moved about by all the characters is that, including, Jack, everybody's trying. Everybody is trying to move forward, and they don't really know how. It's just not really throwing the towel kind of people. That's what Emma has created, that there is a forward movement, no matter how hard it is, to try to figure it out and to be loving and to try to understand the best way to move forward and get a whole life, closer to a whole family life back again, because it's a tremendous loss. It's a tremendous devastation to not have that. So, but they're characters that do try and do move forward, and there's a tremendous amount of love there, and that's why I think that the story really reflects that.
The first part is an easy question to answer. It was a decision we made very early on that I would shoot as far as possible in sequence. So that meant shooting the room section first, which was not practically the easiest thing to do because we shot in Toronto coming into winter, and it would have made a hell of a lot of sense to get the exteriors over with while the weather was still okay, and then when it started to snow and the temperature hit -15, get inside a nice cozy studio. But I think because I like to work in quite an organic way, I think, where what you experience in the making of it can be then reinserted into the film, so that I was in constant contact with Emma. Emma would come and watch, and we'd talk all the time, and stuff would happen in the room section, and we discover things about the relationship. Tonal sort of shifts would happen, and we would be able to then kind of imagine forward and put that back into the script, which is a great way to be able to work. Also, for Jake's sake, that was the original reason, was that it would just be a lot easier for Jake if the story unfolded naturally. It's tough enough. His role is already an extraordinarily difficult role for such a young actor, but to be able to shoot in sequence really helped. But I think all of us in the end found it just a wonderful way to work. It's going to be very hard to go back to the usual way of working, and I will fight as much as I can, at least within the bounds of what's practical, to work in sequence as much as I possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was such I know that there's probably a version of this movie where we shot it out of order, but I can't imagine it because it became such a vital aspect of it, because you could feel for everything that was happening in room, and especially because we had a crew of whether it was 6, and it was such a small space. Every day that we shot in room, you could feel more and more agitation with the crew and with all of us in this small space and this push to get out. And it felt like by the time it hit doing this escape sequence, there was this feeling of, Brie, get us out of here, get us home. And the crew would talk a lot about how they just couldn't wait to get out of room. Just got to get out of room, and people would look at me and be like, you must be really excited to get out of room because it's going to get so much easier for you. I remember thinking, No, I'm pretty sure that's not how it's going to go, and of course it wasn't.
And nor was it for the crew, actually,
No, it
because
became
we
very
all got outside
difficult.
and we found ourselves on the streets, bad weather, and of course a lot of practical difficulties. But actually, in a funny sort of way, we've become institutionalized. We ourselves felt, oh, we don't have that kind of, we don't have that cozy certainty of what each day is going to be like. And I think the audience watching the film also, and this was an intentional thing, begin to feel, yeah, there's something about those certainties. We knew where the badness was in the room, we knew where the goodness was. In the outside, it's complicated, and that's in a way more threatening and more challenging.